Welcome back to part 2 of our MSO Ed seminar today. Our second presentation focuses on cybersecurity and best practices. As a reminder, our antitrust guidelines and disclaimers are in the program, so please be sure to take a look at them. Our presenter today is newly named CIO of Quess GTS, Steve Shively. So congratulations on that, Steve, and take it away.
Okay. I appreciate that. And I don't know how many folks were attending the last session. I did attend it, and I thought it was actually a really good session. It complements and overlaps some of what I'll be talking about today. Let me share my screen. I am a user of Teams more than Zoom, but let's see if I can get the screen right. So you are seeing the cybersecurity first slide. Is that correct?
Okay. Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. I will. I'm going to be talking to you today about cybersecurity and compliance and the risk continuum as a concept of basically, if you have basic controls, you're at a higher risk than if you have more sophisticated controls. And as we walk through that, we're going to talk about some of the details and data and statistics and experiences that I have seen over the years and that are relevant, and what's going on in 2023, what's going on in 2024. In my bio a little bit is I've worked for insurance companies for a long time. I'm now in a service provider role to help protect insurance companies and other institutions, not always just financial institutions, but I've got a lot of experience with that. The company that I'm working with is Quess GTS, and we offer an array of services that are around insurance, the insurance industry. So hopefully the experience that we have as a company and my experience personally, will be relevant here in the conversation and speaking to the audience. And I appreciate MSO giving us the opportunity to hopefully educate and inform and hit some things that are really relevant in the cybersecurity and compliance realm. So with that said, what you'll learn today, what are the main cyber threats that we're dealing with in 23 and facing in 24? What are the problem areas facing many organizations around cyber risk? Compliance, you really can't talk about it today without talking about some of the compliance and regulations that you're beholden to, and how they change, and then how do you keep up with them? And then, as I mentioned, this continuum of cyber readiness, where do you land on that on that scale, if you will, and where are you on the continuum, and how do you move? Part of that is building a culture of cyber awareness. And then I have a couple of case studies that I'll talk about at the end. However, I may work them in as we go through the material, just as they'll be relevant. So let me move on to the next slide. Some facts and things that just catch your attention when you think about cybercrime. $8 trillion predicted in 2023. So we're not quite to the end of 2023, but as you can just see in the headlines, there's a lot of cybercrime out there, and we'll talk some about the headlines. MGM obviously is probably the one that jumps to everybody's mind in the forefront, and we'll definitely talk about that one. Data breaches. 33 billion records stolen by cyber criminals this year. Every 39 seconds, a cyber attack happens. So it's not if, it's when. Just while I've been talking, there have been 3 or 4 cyber attacks that have happened. That's crazy. I mean, that's the reality. Data privacy. So 47% of American adults have had their personal information exposed. As I was going through preparing this slide presentation and listening to Bill's presentation earlier, I've received 2 letters from 2 of those organizations myself about my personal information being exposed, and I would imagine many in the audience have also had that happen, and it's near and dear, and it's becoming more prevalent. And then cybersecurity positions, right? So there's the bad guys, and then there's the good guys. 3.5 million open cybersecurity positions today that are having trouble being filled. We don't have enough skill in our business to deal with everything we have to deal with, and we'll talk a little bit about AI and how that's going to change it one way or the other on both sides, right? Good guys and bad guys. All right. Most common cyber threats. So these are going to be very familiar to you, I think, for the most part. Phishing and social engineering, ransomware, which is a specific type of malware, configuration mistakes. This is one that probably doesn't get as much attention as it needs to, but we'll talk some more about that one. Poor cyber hygiene. This is I shared my password with somebody. I'm doing things I shouldn't do. But that's still, a very common risk and threat. Vulnerabilities. There are so many more vulnerabilities than you probably realize. We run security scans all the time for our clients, and it's just a mountain of vulnerabilities, and you just have to figure out how to have a good management strategy around that. DDoS. So it's a distributed denial of service attack designed to really shut your front door business websites down. It's really interesting how that attack works. So we'll spend a minute or two just to educate. Mobile devices. We're a mobile remote workforce. We have mobile devices everywhere. Have our security policies really caught up with that? From the written policy all the way to the technical controls. And then Internet of Things. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but I mean, that's your smart refrigerator, that's your now smart dryer, your smart TV, your remote, automated thermostat. I mean, there's a lot of things in the Internet of Things. And then third-party exposure. So even if you're doing things really well, how about your third parties? Are they compliant to your set of security standards? And are they doing what your business needs them to do? So let me move on. So reason for cyber intrusions, and this sort of springboards from the previous slide, 0-day exploits. These are things like the Move It, right? So there's a legit software out there that's used for a specific purpose. Well, now it has a vulnerability that's discovered, and before the software provider manufacturer can address the vulnerability, the cyber threat actors, the bad guys, are trying to exploit it. Once they found it, then they publish this exploit, and then everybody that's in that cyber threat actor bad guy business starts to try to capitalize on it. They try to find it and exploit it. Social engineering. So this is responsible for 85% of breaches, which includes phishing. The poor cyber hygiene I talked about a moment ago, using simple passwords, using the same password on every single website that you log into. Yes, it's easy to remember, but it opens you up to a lot more exposure. Cloud vulnerabilities. Everybody's moving to the cloud or has moved to the cloud or somewhere in that journey. So now that there's so many applications out there, the breaches, the possibility of breaches is much higher. Ransomware, we'll get into that a little bit later, but a lot of that happens from users being phished. And pay attention to the 38%. That's a number that most companies are between 30 and 40% phish prone before they start a cyber awareness program. Well, that means like 3 or 4 people out of 10 are going to click that email you don't want them to click, and then they will give up some information, potentially opening up to ransomware. AI-enabled attacks, we'll talk more about that towards the end of my presentation, but just think about it. It's speed and scale. They can do things better, faster, cheaper, And so we have to be, as the white hat or the good guys, in a position to try to defend that and use those tools. And we'll talk a little bit about how we do that, how your organization can do that. And then post-attack procedures. Well, once you've suffered an attack, and again, it's not if, it's when, then you go into kind of the trophy case. You start getting attention from threat actors that would have never given you attention before. So you need to make sure that your post-attack procedures are solid and that you've closed up holes so that they can't be exploited again. A lot of things in like the tabletop exercise we'll talk a bit about, and that were covered in the last session. Very good advice. Tabletop exercise. Make sure you know lessons learned. Okay, so the impacts of cyber attack. I think these are pretty well known, but I'll mention them, and then as we get into some cases with companies that have had recent breaches, how we'll quantify some of that. But your data, right? So personally identifiable information, or if it's relevant to you, private health information, are a couple key types of information that are protected: sensitive, confidential, protected information. So when a threat actor comes in, there's a couple of different approaches they take. One is, I'm just going to hit you with ransomware, move on. It's hopefully a fast paycheck. But the ones that are more sophisticated come in, spend time in your, inside your environment, learning where this information exists, and then they will harvest some of this information, exfiltrating it, and hang on to it. Now, usually that's for the purpose of delivering a ransomware type payload later, and then when you do not respond in kind to paying the ransom, or you delay response, then they all of a sudden send you this information and basically say, hey, check out what we've already taken from you, and they encourage you to pay the ransom. They then threaten to release that information that they've exfiltrated, your data, to a dark web auction, right? Now, at that point, when data has been exfiltrated or modified, you're in a situation where you have all kind of reporting obligations. We'll talk about compliance and like New York DFS, California's Privacy Act, GDPR. All of these are going to require you to report on that. Then you get into your responsibilities to protect it contractually with your clients and so forth. But there's a lot of damage can come from this. So there's a polling question later, I believe, that asks you to take a shot at what does a data breach cost you on average. Economic loss. So in addition to recovery and restoring from backups and trying to either get decryption keys or buying new hardware, bringing in a forensic security team, cost to investors, there's a lot of financial and economic loss that is naturally associated with, and then the reputation damage. So just imagine if you were at the MGM casino or Caesars or the hotel during this most recent cyber attack, right? The reputation damage started right there, and all the social media accounts that were hit, and then the news outlets. And then people are thinking, if it can happen to MGM, it can happen to me. But reputation damage is huge. There was in the furniture industry, a company in Europe that suffered reputational damage, and they monitored really how long it took them to recover. And I don't think they're fully recovered. This has been a couple of years from the attack, but it would suggest, even in that attack, which was not devastating, but the reputation damage has followed them for at least a couple of years. So it's definitely a cost of a cyber intrusion. We have a poll question. So, what is the average cost of a data breach in the U.S.? And not sure. Let's see if I can change my screen a bit. I'm not sure I can see the survey results the way my screen is set up. So
I'll put them up in a minute.
okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so our answers are, it's over $5 million. The average cost is around $9 million for a data breach. Now, obviously, there's small, medium, large, and the large ones I'm sure are driving the number, but yeah, $9 million. So in the previous session, someone asked a question about how do you get management buy-in to do some of these things that were asked in that session, as well as I'm talking about. I think educating them, the management team, to make sure they understand the cost of doing nothing or doing too little could bear significant financial burden or reputation if you don't do enough. Not to mention compliance is forcing the issue. So you can always use compliance regulations to help make sure management is aligned if you're not seeing their support. Okay, let me move to, well, let's see. Let's talk about the MGM for just a moment. So this obviously was in the news, $100 million. And the thing about this is, this is likely a nation state sponsored group, Black Cat, that's associated with Russia. And, all indications are kind of pointing there. But, so now reputation damages happen, revenue impact, and again, the panic sets in. Not if you're the MGM management team, you've probably done a lot of things to prevent this. And if it can happen there, people are thinking it can happen anywhere. But I've been in many incident responses, and this is the moment that it hits you. Now, where did it come from? How did it happen? How do I contain it? What do I have to do? Who do I have to notify? And this is one of the letters that has gone out saying your personal information was compromised. So there are many more that are much smaller, but they're happening, and it's more and more prevalent. We'll see some numbers on that'll be indicative of that around just cyber insurance premiums, and where they've gone from like 2010 to where they're headed, where they are now, and then where they're headed in the next couple of years. Sorry, the slide didn't change. There we go. So some other examples of recent attacks. So just when you look at attacks overall, in May to July period, 58% of all detections were malware. Well, that includes ransomware. So still, probably the most prevalent type of attack, definitely very impactful. Phishing accounted for nearly 25%, adware, quite annoying, but a little over 8%. And then cryptojacking. For those that aren't familiar with cryptojacking, I experienced this it was April 1st. I think it was like 2014. It was my first encounter with it. But cryptojacking is when a company's put malware on or a threat actor has put malware on your machine. Your machine is now doing their bidding in the background. You won't know it. Your performance may be degraded on your machine, but what it's out there doing is mining for Bitcoin. So that's a type of attack that accounted for 3.6%. Better Outcomes Registry and Network impacted by a cyber breach. due to this software Move It, right? So it's a legitimate software. It had a 0-day vulnerability. They exploited it. And in this case, more than 3.4 million records were breached. And that went back to records, from January of 2010 up to May of 2023. So that's exposing, a lot of health information. And, obviously, this company is now having to deal with the fallout of that. This is the configuration. I said misconfigurations of systems are things that probably don't get enough attention. In this particular case, there was a configuration, and he left an Elasticsearch and Kibana interface unprotected. So it's misconfigured. And that exposed records, 3.8 billion records, and over 239 million login credentials. So now notifications go off, what were you doing? Are your customers going to sue you? Your business partners? What are the fines going to be relative to, data exposure? These are, recent attacks, and they're growing. Around insurance, there's a few recent examples where we have CareSource, American National, and Sun Life. With CareSource, that was in the end of May this year. And this is where I was talking about being sued. So there's a $9.9 million lawsuit filed against them because they lost about 3 million customer records with personal information. So now the lawsuit is basically saying, you violated the health and privacy laws by failing to protect this information. So the question becomes, what were they doing? Where were they on the continuum? Were they doing enough? Did they have it documented? These are the types of tests that take the tabletop, written policies, tabletop company awareness throughout the organization of how important it is to protect this data, and then technical controls such as data leakage protection, data encryption within the applications and databases. There's a lot that can be done there, but you can see that if the controls aren't in place, the compliance laws are requiring you to do it, it can open you up to significant financial loss, and obviously, customers lose faith. American National fell victim to the same Move It vulnerability. 35,000 Texans were affected, according to the Texas Attorney General. Sun Life, this is one of the letters I actually personally received as a customer there. And the Move It data breach impacted them, name, date of birth, social security number, the typical PII information. So these attacks continue to happen. And I mentioned the MGM attack being nation state. I'll just spend a moment here, but the nation state attacks, well funded, right? So they have R&D labs where they have a team of cyber professionals, I'll say, who look for ways to increase their effectiveness of attacks, probe at vulnerabilities that are in the organization, take advantage of phishing. The AI in how it's making phishing more effective because of the use of natural language in crafting AI attacks is upping the game there. And so, having a good cyber program that your user, I wrote an article one time about a user being, kind of your weakest link. So you need to transform them into, the human firewall, to put them on the front line, to educate them, because the attacks are becoming so much more sophisticated. As many layers and layers and layers of defense as we have, that frontline user defense is one that your organization definitely should do as much as you possibly can there. All right, let me see. So ransomware. So everybody knows what ransomware is, but let me explain it a little differently. It's not anymore just a kid in the garage with a Twinkie and a can of Coke that's hacking at your machine. It's a very sophisticated criminal organization. They actually have divisions, if you can imagine. It's run like a company. So you can buy these as a service, ransomware as a service, and then so they market it. So there's like a marketing division, and then they're scouring for vulnerabilities. As soon as you publish something to the internet, hundreds of thousands of threat actors start to probe it for vulnerabilities. They find vulnerable machines. Then there's another group that's the actual hackers who will go in and try to exploit those vulnerabilities. And when they do, they will then they will then basically sell that attack to a buyer, a bidder, an investor. And from there, that attacker uses his technical skills to exploit the vulnerability and deliver the ransomware payload. Now that the payload is, let's say, been detonated, that technical person who's really good at hacking moves on to their next job. Now you're dealing with the people who negotiate the ransom and the settlement. It's a very sophisticated business. It's usually operated out of multiple foreign countries, and it makes it very difficult for us to actually take legal action against them. So, but it's the point is it's sophisticated. It's now more nation state backed, we're seeing, and they run it like a business. It's not just back in the day with Matthew Broderick, it's not just war games and a kid dialing into a server and doing a little hacking. So just our defenses and our approach to it and dealing with it need to be equally sophisticated. There's a few types of ransomware that are listed on the screen. I think probably these are some we deal with quite often, but there's new ransomware variants being developed all the time, and I think AI is going to make that more of a reality as we're seeing the sophistication around the attacks increase. So there are besides ransomware, there are other malicious attacks that attempt to disrupt your business. Denial of service or distributed denial of service, DDoS, is one. The reason I mentioned this as one to pay attention to is there's certain security defenses that you can put in place, and without those, it's very hard to defend against a DDoS type attack. It is a very easy attack to procure if you are wishing to interrupt someone's business. So as a service, this can happen. The way it works is a threat actor scanning for vulnerabilities finds vulnerable machines around the globe. They then install some malware on those machines. Those machines can then be used to launch an attack. So the threat actor can set a single server or console and tell 1,000 machines around the globe to all of a sudden ask your website to respond to them with legitimate queries to your website. So you get one response, that's easy, that's fine. You get 50, you get 500, you get 500,000, you get 5 million. Now your web server is doing nothing but trying to answer those requests. So it's a very debilitating attack, and these we see regularly. We probably deal with a few a month with our clients, and there are tools that help, but just be aware that it's not just ransomware. So when you maybe run your tabletop simulations and things like that, broaden the scope a bit to make sure that you're looking at a wide array of attacks. I think our previous session, Bill was correct in saying that this needs to be something that's being looked at not just solely as an IT responsibility, like with the tabletop, business continuity, business recovery scenarios. So, but just don't narrowly focus it on ransomware. I have about 3 engagements this month that are solely want me to focus a tabletop exercise on ransomware. But my counsel to them would be, broaden your scope a bit. Also, everybody wants to run a ransomware or a tabletop exercise in November, December. My suggestion would be try to do them more frequently throughout the year. All right, I'm probably a little behind, so I'm going to pick up the pace. This slide basically is these attacks are sophisticated. The attacker got in through phishing. They came in, they used legitimate tools to help move along and collect data and do reconnaissance. They then sophisticated, right? They sold it to another attacker. Hey, we got credentials. It's very easy to get admin credentials once you're in the network. And now this attacker said, okay, I'm going to use those. And they unleashed ransomware and asked for a $2.5 million ransom. And it's a real case, and it's how many of them work today. So that's just representing, kind of what an attack looks like. Premiums and insurance costs in 2010, about 600,000 in premium. 2021, 10 billion, expected to reach 23 billion by 2025. Only 55% of organizations have cyber insurance. It means 45% do not. And the one thing I do, I'm not a broker or an agent, but in giving just general advice, just make sure if your insurance is going to pay for the ransomware attack. Because if we look at that previous slide, $2.5 million was the ransomware ask. So in this case, if you had insurance that wouldn't pay for that, you'd still be on the hook for the $2.5 million. And if you're trying to get cyber insurance, the bar is getting higher and higher. More and more is being required of you, expected of you. And it's not only expected there, it's expected in the compliance regulations and your customers and clients you're dealing with. So are you ready to respond to a cyber incident? The response plan, have a plan, and practice that plan. Make sure you know how to communicate. If you have to communicate to a regulatory body or to your clients, know what your obligations are and how you're going to handle your internal communications. Know where your data is, know where your customers' data lives. Go through the exercise to map it and review it. Don't just say, well, it's in the claim system, it's in the billing system, but actually know in detail where that is. Train your staff, data protection, data handling, phishing. Make sure you have a good program and that they are trained on the incident response program. Dedicate resources. So Chief Information Security Officer, Data Privacy Officer, Compliance Officer, have somebody responsible for this in your organization. Don't think that everybody, it's being done unless you have somebody who's really accountable for it. I can't emphasize that enough. So this next section of the presentation, I'm going to hit on compliance, and then I'll talk about the continuum, and then I'll close with a couple of case studies. But compliance, it's the ongoing process for defining security policies, auditing compliance in line with those policies, and ensuring that compliance violations are resolved. So yeah, find out what you're supposed to do. Are you doing it? And if you're not doing it, make sure you fix it and document all of that, because that could be very important. As each one of these regulations, and I'm only going to hit on a few, but whether it's an executive order, trying to implement zero trust architecture, the Federal Trade Commission, requires now non-bank financial institutions to protect and secure customer data. So, non-bank financial institutions sounds a whole lot like insurance companies. Then there's GDPR. Right, we all knew about that. California's the CCPA, the privacy agreement, has a lot of similarities to the GDPR in terms of a few points. I think that's actually on my next slide. But Australia, if you do business outside the U.S., Bermuda, Canada, there's various compliance regulations. And so how do you keep up with those? New York DFS was probably one of the first ones to grab a lot of attention, right? And it's had a couple of changes since. It wasn't so prescriptive when it started, but now it's becoming more prescriptive. And the reporting on this thing at the end of the year, if you're a covered entity, is pretty it's a pretty arduous task, right? To say I'm compliant at every step of the way. Here's the evidence. But this is a really good one to look at if you're not so far on your journey. This requirement covers things pretty extensively from a security standpoint, what you should model after. The NAIC, of course, tries to help with the development of model laws and things like that. I read emails from the NAIC all the time, and usually there's one or two good articles that they'll publish around updates to things like cyber or data. So this is a good way to keep tabs on what's changing in the regulatory environment that would affect insurance companies. And then I mentioned the California Privacy Act. It also had a change earlier this year, but this is got that right to know what data you're collecting about them, right for you to opt out. I don't want you to have my data, right to to forget me. How do you do that? How do you accomplish that? And then what other regulatory bodies have similar guidelines? So, the thing to do is make sure you've got either a chief information security officer, a chief compliance officer, or data privacy officer, somebody with that role or those roles in your organization helping you manage this. There are things that I would recommend you do, and I kind of touched on them, but set up a database or some kind of tracking mechanism that helps you understand what you're responsible for, what your third parties are responsible for, what your business partners are responsible for. Because even if you're doing it well, maybe one of your partners in the chain is the weak link, and then they are the ones that have a breach. They have your data, they have access to your data. Make sure that that you understand this and somebody is accountable. Then this one little diagram here, it's get your dedicated team, do some analysis and an exercise, set up the controls to apply, to comply with the standards, implement your policies, update them, then monitor them. It's fairly simple, but you have to start, right? And you start by knowing where you are, and then what's required of you, and then how do you take steps forward to make sure that you're compliant with that. And then how do you keep, you can't just do it once, set it and forget it. Then you have to stay diligent about it. There are service providers and so forth. If you can't afford, your own CISO, you're not big enough, or your own compliance officer, then leverage a partner to help you with it. There's a lot of very good partners out there. We do this for some firms as well, but if you don't have that capability in-house, seek it out. It's that ounce of prevention worth the pound of cure. So third parties, I kind of went through this, but formalize this. Know who your tier one first parties are. Those are the ones that are dealing with your data, have the most risk, or most important to running your business. So make sure that you know who they are, plan an assessment. Give me simple questions. Just ask them. Maybe they undergo like a SOC 1, or SOC 2, or ISO 27001 review. Ask them for a copy of that. Look for gaps in that, and then put a plan in place. Talk to your key stakeholders. This is your whole organizational security awareness. Make the organization more security aware with each step that you take here. And then there are some great tools that will help you do this. So you can use those tools to help manage and guide the process. The readiness continuum, I'm going to just kind of skip this, I think, and move to the actual continuum. But these are some things that'll be in the presentation that you'll get a copy of. So a very simple picture: basic controls equal higher risk, acceptable or mid-level controls, moderate risk. And then if you've got recommended or advanced controls, you have lower risk. I mean, obviously, you got to figure out where you are on this continuum and then set a roadmap to strive to improve your controls, reduce your risk, and those risks are measured against your compliance obligations, protecting your data, as well as protecting your organization. But this is something that I think most organizations need to understand where they are and then set a plan to move forward. And then, like I said, you can get help with really good security companies that can help you do this. AI, so artificial intelligence, two sides of this coin, the good guys and the bad guys. So the bad guys are definitely starting to leverage it. You can note right here that 60% click rates, open rates on emails where AI was used. If you remember earlier when I was talking, it was between 30 and 40%. I think 38% was the number. But if you're using AI to target your phishing, now 60%. So 6 out of 10 people may open that email, click it, right? And the thing about the AI is they're figuring out it's using not only sophistication, but it's also scale. More and more of these attacks can be launched and more successfully now with the use of AI from the threat actor perspective. So what happens on the other side? And it's not only for phishing, right? They're looking at vulnerabilities, how to best exploit vulnerabilities, way to move faster to defeat detection. So we're studying a lot of that now, and I think we'll see that continue to be the case in the industry. But on the good guy side of it, the thing we have to understand is we can use this tool effectively, and we have, and there have been companies out there that are leveraging AI and machine learning. It's along with end user and entity behavior analytics. So how should a system look? How should a system work? How should a user behave? And this is all studied and understood. So what does your normal operation look like? But that's the model. You have to have a really good model and collect a lot of data to be able to leverage the AI defenses. There's a case study, and I'm going to jump to that now, where AI had helped us prevent an attack right at the front door. But both sides are figuring out where they can use AI and how they can leverage it, and as with everything else, the threat actors always seem to be like one step ahead, and we're always playing catch up. But there are things that we can do, as AI becomes more persistent in this cybersecurity environment. So 2 quick case studies. In this case, their basic controls were at this organization. They had a higher risk. They basically had a user that was phished, and that user gave up their credentials, allowing the threat actor to get in. They mapped the network, got network credentials, and then they deployed a ransomware. It basically took down the environment for the client. I mean, at that point, they weren't our client. They called us in to help. We landed with some on the ground in 2 hours, which is very important when you're dealing with an incident, right? Because the client is already having the worst day of their life. We worked to figure out what it was, to start a recovery, to use backups to do some recovery. In this case, I do think there was a ransom paid to recover part of the environment, but we deployed some technology. It was actually AI-based technology as we brought the environment back online, and the customer, 36 hours later, their insurance company shows up and they say, "We're here to help." The client was not enamored with the idea that it took them that long to respond. And in that case, the response was mostly in the form of lawyers and trying to manage the message and manage the recovery. So there's often different parties vying for different objectives during an incident response and recovery. So you just need to understand, like, what are the parties, like, who's your incident response partner, who's your insurance partner, and that's where walking that tabletop exercise through will help you a lot. But at the end of the story, it's not a bad story. We did a full assessment. We identified many more gaps. We recovered the environment. They were back up and operational within a week, and they now are, their controls are much more advanced, not basic. Their risk is a lot lower. And then the last case study is a very good story. There were a third party actually caused this compromise, is the reason I pointed out the risk around third parties. They were doing some development work for the customer. And they were a payroll, is a shop that's do payroll, and the developer was compromised. Again, ransomware deployed. Fortunately, their production environment was within our data center, and we use an AI agent on the front door, if you will. And as soon as the ransomware tried to make it into that production environment, it was stopped. We again worked with the client in an incident response fashion to help recover their non-production environment, but payrolls went out the door. Security gaps were identified. They did have to follow some compliance steps for reporting, and they worked with their insurance company in a different fashion, but to help pay for the incident response and recovery. There's so many layers and things to consider. This can seem very overwhelming. Don't let it be. Just simple steps. Get your assessment in, figure out where you are in the continuum, where your gaps are, assign somebody to be accountable, and start addressing it. It's a journey. You can't flip a switch and address everything at one time. And then the journey continues, because even after you move yourself from where you are in the current state, the future state's changing. AI is going to change it. There are other things that are going to change it, and you can't have the answer for every single thing. But with planning and dedication and treating it like a journey, you can improve your odds, lower your risk, and improve your success, your chances for success. And there are partners out there that can help you do this if you can't do this internally by yourself.
We have a couple questions, Steve.
Okay.
Which state has the most aggressive cyber requirements? Do you know?
Yeah, well, so I would say state-wise, California and New York are vying for it. I think this California CCPA probably gets my vote. I see a poll has popped up. I think New York's a little better understood, and California is got those controls plus the data controls that are more like GDPR. I say California.
Okay, what do you think about the risk from the major software providers such as Microsoft or others?
Yeah, so Microsoft, it's interesting because they're in everything. They also have their own security solution. Where I come from, sometimes we call that the fox guarding the hen house. So I think there is more pressure put on them to address and deal with vulnerabilities that may be part of their application quickly. But look, I think a third-party tool layers, that you trust but verify. So yes, I'm a Microsoft shop, use Microsoft, but I also have some other tools that are watching the Microsoft. I don't trust it implicitly. The same would be the case for other vendors. So my recommendation is have at least a third-party control or two that helps monitor your major software solutions that you have in-house. Hope that answered your question.
I think so. What is the size or magnitude of an incident to warrant state reporting on a data incident?
So I think that's going to depend on some of the regulations, but I believe I believe it's defined in a couple of regulations, but if you have if you haven't even have, one record that triggers like the California Compliance Act, I think you still have to report it. Yeah, so it can be very, very minimal. And you can even, it doesn't have to be a breach that does this. Let's just say, for example, in one organization I saw, there was a spreadsheet that was to go to one client, and I saw where it had actually arrived on the doorstep, the inbox of another client, and it had a few hundred records of information in it that were sensitive, and they had to actually report that, and it was only a couple hundred records in a spreadsheet.
In the case of ransomware, is the bad actor generally honorable if ransom is paid and restores access? Or
so
is
this,
the victim?
yeah. So this, I meant to mention this earlier, but the bad guys have a reputation, right? So there's companies out there that deal with ransom negotiation, and they, in the many I've been involved with, that's one of the first questions we ask. If we pay the ransom, how likely are we to get the recovery of our systems, or are they going to come back in and they've left a back door open? So there's some firms that deal directly with negotiation that will counsel you on the reputation of a bad actor, and usually it's well known, because if they don't give you your data back, then you're not going to pay them, because you're going to know their reputation. So there are actually reputable bad actors out there, and we've seen ransom paid to them, and they've lived up to their word and give the keys up, and we've recovered.
I believe that's all the questions we have. Jan, did you have something did you want to say something?
Sure. For sure, I want to thank Steve. Love the presentation. Scared to death now. Hope that we have complied. MSO has complied with the New York cyber regulations, and they are really fantastic. I thought your comments were right on the point. I think third-party vendors, most people are not attuned to that, so I think it is great you talked about that. It is one of the requirements, just happens to be out of New York, that you must have a list, and it has to be detailed in your, digital your full relationship with them. So I think it was great. I really think this is timely, and it's not going away. So thank you very, very much. Appreciate it. Sue, you want to go next? You got more to comment?
Did anybody else have a question? I thought. All right. Okay. Well, we hope you all will join us tomorrow for 2 more presentations. Ransomware and You, Not Perfect Together, presented by somebody called Sue Quimby, and Anatomy of a First-Party Property Claim with Rick Gallen of Meth, Bessel, and Warble. It's never too early to offer suggestions for future topics and presenters for our webinars and seminars. We're already working on our schedule for next year. Please check out our library of articles on our website, as well as our new YouTube channel and LinkedIn. For those who won't be joining us tomorrow, our next webinar will be December 12th on De-Stress for Success with our own Mary Beagle, offering us great tips on how to survive life in the fast-paced world that we're in. You can register on our website or contact me for more information, and copies of this presentation will be available to everybody who can hear it. Steve, thank you so much for a great presentation. It really makes you think. So
Thank you.
And if not, we will see everybody, hopefully most of you, tomorrow, and the CE credits will be posted in the next couple of days.
All right. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.